Welcome to Cultivated Live for Wednesday, June 5th. My name is Jay Rosenthal, as you see right here. That's Jeremy Berke, as you see right there. We are the co-founders of Cultivated Media. I am the host of this show. Jeremy is our editor-in-chief. And since we launched Cultivated, our goal has been to be cannabis industry first, providing you with the most important, insightful, useful, and timely information. And we do that every day through our daily newsletter at Cultivated Daily. We do that through this daily live stream at Cultivated Live. So follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to us on YouTube. You can subscribe to Jeremy on Twitter or my Twitter feed as well, but also get our daily newsletter in your inbox. You can get to it at cultivated.news. Jeremy, nice to see you this morning.
Nice to see you too, Jay. And I'll say you can subscribe to our Twitter feeds at your own detriment, but you can subscribe nonetheless.
Right. If you had to subscribe to some of them, do our newsletter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and then way down the bottom, Twitter, because, you know, Twitter banter, it's so, I don't know, rough.
It's rough.
That's the right word?
It's rough out there.
Yeah. It's rough. It's hard out there for a Twitter pimp, I guess. But it is, or like, I know that people are watching this on Twitter. I can tell you right now. So hello to all our Twitter friends and Jeremy's feed. We feed through Jeremy's feed on Thursdays. Every other day we go through my feed. So I think I am JAYM Rosenthal or at JAYM Rosenthal on Twitter /X. You can, if you're on Jeremy's, you know what his Twitter feed is. Jeremy, two things struck me this week that I wanted to get your insight on. One of them, this story is almost so cannabis, I can't believe it. Ben Kovley, the CEO of GTI, Green Thumb Industries, you're going to tell me what I've gotten wrong in the story, wrote a letter to the founder and CEO of Boston Beer Works, talking about, I think, hey, let's merge. I think is basically the gist of the letter, because we think we have these synergies. We are cannabis, you are beverages. You know, you're listed on the stock exchange in New York. We're in Canada. Like, what is this all about, and what should we make of it?
Yeah, Ben Kovley, Green Thumb Industries CEO, he wants to buy the Boston Beer Company. The Boston Beer Company makes Sam Adams. It has a New York Stock Exchange listing. So look, I mean, you know, in a vacuum, this is a pretty interesting deal for Green Thumb, right? We've seen cannabis companies buy liquor companies. You know, they clearly want to diversify. And also for Green Thumb, I think the way they might see this possible deal is as a sort of back end onto the New York Stock Exchange, right? If they buy if they buy the Boston Beer Company, they can take Sam Adams' listing. I think what is underpinning this deal is Ben is being really opportunistic, right? The Boston Beer Company has some buyers circling, a big Japanese whiskey maker, Suntory. I'm probably saying that wrong. And so he might just be being opportunistic, like say, you know, hey, instead of being bought by them, you can be bought by us and look at all these benefits. So it is interesting. I think the chances that the exchange regulators actually let Green Thumb buy Boston Beer Company or remain on the New York Stock Exchange are really low, if not negative. At the same time, like, good for Ben for trying. And I want to just highlight this. I mean, Ben has a sort of larger than life persona. He's a good CEO. You know, Green Thumb is one of the only profitable ones of its peers. And so he's doing something right. But he's also the kind of guy who called himself a self-described cross between Jerry Garcia and Warren Buffett in the Wall Street Journal. So that is the kind of person we're dealing with, who wants to buy Boston Beer Company. You know, I will leave it at that.
I like that combination of people. I would love to see AI actually build a video of that exact person, because I wonder how closely it would resemble actual Ben Kovley, who is very colorful. I encourage you to follow him on Twitter for sure. But it does bring up sort of the next wave of what we may see, certainly with rescheduling, which is interesting industries sort of that are complementary, or one is on its way down, one is on its ascendant, like actually coming together. We've seen Tilray buy up, I think, one or two or three relatively large micro brew companies. So I wonder if this is actually a trend, regulations notwithstanding, that actually would make sense for a conglomerate to own alcohol beverage and cannabis and a couple of other things. But I think it is, to your point, like regulators, whether they be like SEC types or sort of health regulatory types, this is going to take a bit more time than I think probably Ben Kovley or maybe the cannabis industry overall would actually like.
Yeah, no, but at the end of the day, like you're absolutely right. It makes a ton of sense. Like there's a lot of, to use, the kind of MBA term, there's a lot of synergy, right? There are more people consuming cannabis every day than alcohol. That was sort of earth-shattering study that came out in the past 2 weeks. And so obviously, I think Green Thumb is smart and Ben is smart to look at these trends and say, like, how do we take advantage of them? The regulatory hurdles being what they are, like this is not a vacuum. And despite that synergy existing, I think it's going to be really challenging for a deal like this to close. Honestly, though, like I like the call. Good for trying. The letter's great. Yeah.
And frankly, it's like I'm sitting here in Toronto, and for sure, we have a major Constellation Brands investment into Canopy. Molson Coors here invested in another cannabis company. They do put out beverages. Like this is not uncommon where the regulations actually do portend. But the idea that Ben would actually send a letter to Boston Beer Company to actually do it is bold and sort of newsworthy and news grabbing. And certainly it was in the Wall Street Journal where the Jerry Garcia Warren Buffett quote was. So it is interesting to keep our eye on for sure. But Ben's always interesting to keep his eye on, and so is GTI as this unfolds. And I don't know where Ben is catching either fish or Dead & Co. this summer, but I'm sure it'll be some of those places. So if you go to their shows, you can look for look for Ben. Jeremy, one other thing that caught my eye that you wrote this week was about California cannabis sales. And I say that slowing down with my voice because they are slowing down in real life. This we can talk about it in the context of California, but I think we've also seen it in other markets where there is a natural flow of excitement and then downturn and then normalization. But California is a bellwether in a lot of ways. What do you think about what's happening in California?
It's quite interesting. I mean, in the last quarter, according to state data, they sold about $1 billion of cannabis. That sounds like a big number. But what that really means is you can infer that California is about a $4 billion market. Michigan itself, with, about a quarter of the population of California, is already $3.5 billion market. So California has some severe problems with its cannabis industry. The other piece I'll say about that is excise taxes for cannabis in California are set to be ratcheted up to 19% from 50% automatically in 2025. And so any of the problems they currently have are about to be exacerbated. There's a huge risk that a lot of dispensaries are going to fail and go into bankruptcy. The last piece of evidence there is that last year in 2023, there's about $250 million of taxes that cannabis dispensaries defaulted on. And so we expect that default rate to go up. It's a problem, right? I think California, like New York, like other states, its cannabis policy is about trade-offs, right? You have to have an eye towards the history of cannabis, the history of the racialized war on drugs, and the reasons why we legalize cannabis, which are social justice reasons. At the same time, it is crucial that regulators create an environment where businesses can succeed and thrive. And a lot of what that means are making these really important and difficult trade-offs between tax revenue, regulation, and openness of the market. And California just clearly has not gotten that balance right. It's a little bit more unfortunate because California, as I wrote in the newsletter, it's kind of the spiritual and cultural epicenter of the industry, but it is absolutely not the financial epicenter of the industry. And so regulators there, if they want to maintain that, if they want to maintain the dynamic business environment for California cannabis, they're going to have to make some changes.
That's why Ben Kovler wasn't sending a letter to California brewery in Massachusetts.
No, look, it doesn't mean that there's no money to be made in the state, right? And it doesn't mean that California's cannabis industry is going away, but it's clear that these businesses are way too heavily overregulated and heavily overtaxed for them to become and still be viable going concerns. And that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem for job losses. It's a huge problem for the industry and for consumers who, frankly, like California weed.
Yeah, well, for sure. And having been to cannabis shows, Hall of Flowers and others in California, it's for sure the brand epicenter of cannabis. I forget what you called it, but it is where the cannabis culture is sort of the hub there, and it does spread throughout the country, but that does not necessarily equal success necessarily for the industry as it stands right now. Unfortunately, because I think there's obviously a huge market and huge opportunity there, and hopefully we get to that at some point. Anything else capturing your attention as the week turns on?
Yeah, the last thing is, Canopy finally closed its Acreage deal. The reason that caught my attention is not because the deal is any more so earth-shattering, but in 2019, 5 years ago when it was first announced, everyone thought that it was going to change the game. All these Canadian cannabis companies would be able to figure out how to get access to the much more lucrative, larger US market while keeping their major exchange listings. Cannabis years are dog years. I think people have heard me say that before. I'm not the only one to say that. But we've seen so many boom and bust cycles since 2019 that this deal, from when it was announced to when it's closed, is in a totally different environment, right? Acreage is laden with debt, I think around $365 million. And so Canopy's exercising its options also as a way to just help Acreage with its debt. It is no longer this big market opportunity. It's also a little bit about saving the company. And so, these things do change, but I was excited to see it actually close. I think, reporting on a deal in 2019 and then reporting on it closing in 2024 is kind of a interesting experience.
Well, maybe you'll have the chance to report on the GTI.
Well, I would love that. Yeah.
5 years. Oh, it's funny thinking about that. Well, Jeremy, as always, thank you for making time on this Wednesday morning. Tomorrow, we will be back at 10 a.m. with Krista Raymer, who I think is traveling, but we'll connect with her on the road to talk about cannabis retail. I think we're going to unpack Memorial Day weekend and what that means for cannabis retailers, if it means anything, and diving deep into data analysis probably. And then we'll be back again on Friday as well. So Jeremy, thanks so much for your time today. Find us on cultivated.news. Find Jeremy on Twitter. Find me on Twitter. Follow us on LinkedIn. Get to us on YouTube as well. Jeremy, thanks for your day. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate it.